And now for something completely different.
Happy Hour. Happy Hour.
It's time for Hoppe in the morning.
What's up? This is Happy Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppe. And on the phone line is a guy that I grew up listening to. My mom would pick me up from elementary school, and she would have his show on. Chicago radio legend Garry Meier is on Happy Hour. What's up, Gary?
Ryan, I was in high school when you were in grade school, so don't stretch this out like, yeah, my mother was a fan, yeah.
How does that make you feel whenever like a younger person says, "Oh, I grew up listening to you"?
I love it because they're listening. That's the main thing. It's just funny when you've spent this much time doing what I've been doing, that's going to happen. And I guess the alternative is not good, so I'll take this.
So how has everything been going with your podcast? You've been doing it for years now after your last job, and it just feels like you're happy, Gary.
I love doing it. It's been 8 years, and in tandem with podcasts emerging more and more, well, they're all over the place now, 8 million podcasts out there, I see the decline of radio in the same way where what I'm doing, the format that I'm doing, is much freer as far as the flow goes. Radio still adheres to this format where you talk for a few minutes and you got to stop and start and stop and start. The podcast format is you talk as long as you want. And I think that's a better flow, especially if you're interviewing somebody.
I remember I'd be driving around when I was going to Illinois Center for Broadcasting back 10 years ago when you had your afternoon show, and I'd be driving down the highway and I was enjoying your show, and then you would go to commercial for 7 minutes, and then I would go to music radio, and then I would pull into my parking lot of my school, and then that would be it. Like, radio is so weird where they feel like they need the 3 or 4 commercial breaks per hour, but I feel like they need to allow the talent to talk more.
In a 4-hour radio show, there's only 2 hours of total content of the host, which means half is for other elements. And radio has been doing this same format for over 50 years, and I don't understand why they're not adjusting when they've got all of this competition that's just going to get stronger and stronger, and they're still sitting there thinking it's 1975.
Why do you think radio's doing that? Because it just feels like I've been in radio 12 years, and even back 12 years ago, everybody was saying the same thing. You go to radio conferences, you read articles online from consultants, and everyone's saying what you're saying, Gary, but no one's doing anything.
Well, I don't know why. They've either given up or they're afraid to do something because they've been doing this same thing for so long. But either of those choices is not good. And as they see the erosion that's happening with the audience and with the revenue, I don't understand what the game plan is. Is this the way you're going to go until it completely collapses? How is that a business plan?
Do you think radio's dead?
It's not dead, but it's certainly, and I think it's its own worst enemy. And you talk to any of these radio executives, well, it's the new technology that we're competing with and all this, but that's part of it. I think radio has shot itself in the foot more than any of the other newer technologies. And it's still in every car. How many places do you have that advantage where it's embedded in something that somebody uses every day? I think that's a pretty good structure to have for a business. But even at that, you've got now satellite radio that's on the dashboard. So that siphons some of the audience off. And then people go, well, I'll just plug my phone in through the car and listen to a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did the other day when I was listening to your show. I feel like it was the beginning of the 2010s when Bluetooth came around and the iPhone really became a big thing because it came out in 2007. To me, the iPhone was the game changer because you can have your own radio station essentially on your phone.
Right, exactly. And I think that if you're radio, you have to start should have started looking at this years ago, but start looking at it now and adjust, or I don't know what they're going to do.
How much do you miss being on live radio, though?
Having said all that, Ryan, I would love to go back on a radio station and keep the podcast and do some kind of hybrid of both. It's still what brought me to the dance, so I don't want to sound like I'm completely stabbing it in the back. I would love to get back on and see how it feels now that I've been off for a number of years, because I think if I plug back in tomorrow, I don't think you'd notice any missed step as far as being on the radio.
Well, and I view your show as a radio show and a podcast format, something I try to go for as well, because you'll listen to some podcasts about, like, let's say murder or some documentary, and there's a different format between when a radio host does a podcast and, let's say, when some, I don't want to say amateur, but a non-radio person does a podcast, if that makes sense.
You hit the nail right on the head, Ryan, because the level of entry is so low, anybody can do it that has a computer and a microphone. You're going to get the hobbyists. And most of the podcasts out there are hobbyists. And I don't think they have any intention of making any money with it, and they wouldn't, so they don't even go there. But they're in the pipeline. And now you're swimming in this very big ocean of people doing the similar format, but they're not professional broadcasters. And that's where I bring at least some skill to the podcast, because that was my whole background. And I still have that radio brain of, is this interesting? Does this move along? And am I engaging the audience? Where if you're talking about gardening tips and stuff, you don't care really.
Yeah, and the other thing is, like, 75% of podcasts only have like 10 episodes, and then the people give up.
Right. That's a good point too. A lot of the 7 million, 8 million are people that do it once a month, once a year, and they throw it on the internet. And you're right. They think that, well, it's just talking on a microphone. I can do that. And they, I guess, quickly realize that after a few shows, I don't have anything else to say, or this is really hard, or whatever it is that leads them to not do it anymore.
One of my side hustles here in Tampa Bay, along with my radio job during the day, it's fascinating. I'll produce people's podcasts. They'll message me and say, hey, I want you to produce my podcast. And when you see somebody else who's just beginning trying to do a podcast, it really makes you realize how good you are at your job. Like, I feel like if you were to begin producing people's podcasts, I'm not saying radio people should pat themselves on the back, but it's crazy. There are some very bad podcasts out there.
Ryan, life is all about discipline, and I went to 8 years of Catholic grammar school, and I thought the nuns were very harsh at the time, but then I realized you need guardrails, and you need some kind of structure. And I know we love to just do whatever the hell we want, but that's fine to a point. And radio, podcasting, radio was a disciplinary thing, and I'm glad I had all those years, because it forced me to really stay within the lines of keep it moving and get those topics out there that you think people will like, as opposed to people who didn't have that training and that doesn't compute with them. I'm sorry, thinking of commuting times now. You got me into a radio thing.
Yeah.
Let's go to the traffic. And they don't have to think that way. They're not disciplined in that. So they don't. That's not something that they had to think about, and so they just get on. Well, I'll just keep talking, and oh, this is interesting. I think I don't know.
It was funny when I made the post about you coming on Hoppe Hour. A lot of radio hosts like Rick Rumble in Norfolk, Virginia, and all these guys were like, man, they're the reason I'm in radio. They're the reason that I realized that I can do that edgy format. Is it crazy to think that you truly are one of the originals of like talk radio that's fun?
I take that as the ultimate compliment. I'm honored to hear that, Ryan, because I was doing what my skill was. I didn't really think I had any other skills, so I was really happy and lucky to get into radio and then have it happen the way it did. And the fact that other people have emulated that is, it's really, I don't think about it when people say that like you do. I think, wow, that's pretty cool, because I don't think about it every day. But if that happened and they're doing good things with it, hey, that to me is worth whatever I did.
And I think that's a good attitude that you have, because I feel like some people, if they were to find out that people were influenced by them, there's more of a negative energy, because I've seen it with people I worked with when they realize that other people are influenced by them. To me, there's two types of radio people. There's people that root for others, and then there's ones that hate on others. And I've worked with a few that hate on others, and it's like sometimes I've had to quit the job because I'm like, I cannot do this.
I think that's funny you said that, because now that you have said it, it reminds me of all the years of being in radio and having seen that same scene over and over again, where guys got extremely jealous and vitriolic towards somebody because they had more success than they did. And it was just this tear down that they couldn't deal with the other person. They would just tear them down. And that energy really is something that I never subscribe to. I just don't get into that. If I do, I would keep it private, because I just think that is not something I'd want to put out there publicly. And these people don't seem to mind that they're tearing other people down. It's not my style.
So when you filled in for Mancow like 5 years ago, I'll never forget it. The Robert Feeder article was like, he's radio's second banana or whatever. And I thought that was such a weird article for him to say. What's your relationship like with Mancow?
Mancow and I get along very well. And that article, I never saw that article. There's this weird dynamic with certain people who reported on the media in Chicago, and they decided they were going to find punching bags, and that was the official punching bag, and it would always remain that. Whatever you did, it didn't matter. They were going to take a shot at it. And here's the way I looked at that. The fact that people still talk about me in the media or whatever, no matter what, means I'm still top of mind. I don't care what they say. And I've been talking about this lately on my show. The two richest radio people ever are Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh. And it was reported that both of those guys had as many people listening to them that hated them as liked them, and that's what propelled them to their riches. The people that hated them listened more than the people that liked them, they found out.
I just turned 30 about 7 months ago, and I spent my whole 20s caring about what people think. I would get a lot of tweets whenever I was on air, and I would always have it, Gary, where for every 4 tweets that were like, oh, Hoppy's so great, the next 4 would be someone that's under an anonymous account. And I used to really let that get to me, and I don't know what it was, but there was just a moment in my life where I'm like, they never say it to your face. Whenever I've been recognized in my life, I've never once, Gary, had someone come up to me and go, oh, you're awful. It's fascinating.
Right. They won't do it to your face. The people that like you will come up and say something, but the people that don't, they're going to hide behind something. And I learned early on, I don't care whatever that stuff is that's written. I never read the real good stuff, and I never read the real bad stuff, meaning I stayed completely agnostic from all of it. And it was the best way to go, because in my mind, I knew what my things were that had to be worked on, and I was working on them. And outside of that, there's nothing else I can do. I'm trying to do the best performance I can do every time I do whatever I do. It's not like I go in there and go, boy, I hope I have a crappy show today. And if people want to take shots, I look at it, I turn that around. Like I said, I make it in my head, well, they must know me because they're talking about me.
One thing I want to ask you that's non-radio is you've been in Chicago a long time, and you were on the radio in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, even through the 2020s. What I'm saying is you've seen a lot of Chicago. What was the difference between current day Chicago and, let's say, the prime of it in the 70s through maybe 2004? What was old Chicago like?
It's funny. That's a coincidental kind of comment, too, because I was looking at some stuff on the net today, and somebody posted a picture of Rush Street in the 1940s. And I was trying to figure out where in Rush Street that those buildings are all gone that was in the picture. And then I remembered how great Rush Street was in its heyday when it was a little gritty and nightclubs and bars and greasy spoons, and now it's all sanitized. Now, having said that, I'm looking at this and going, what the hell has happened to this city over the last 10 or 15 years? All you hear coming out of it is crime, and things are just falling apart, and da-da-da. And I didn't grow up with that. It seemed like it was going in a good direction. It was a great city, and now it seems to have lost some of its direction, and I don't know how they're going to find it back. And maybe some of this is exaggerated, but I got to tell you, you never heard about people driving cars through storefronts on Michigan Avenue and all the things you're hearing in the last 10 years. That you did not hear before, and I'm sure a lot of big cities are having the same problem. I just don't, that's not the city I grew up in. Let me put it that way.
I noticed a change in the city. I would say, okay, so I moved out of Arlington Heights, Illinois in 2014 and moved to Cleveland and then Tampa. So I left about 10 years ago, and I visited maybe every 2 or 3 years for a morning show boot camp or to see family. Mm-hmm. And I went in 2023 in August for my 30th birthday, and there's just this edge. I went to the Virgin Hotel and I got a few drinks and I walked around, and it was like around 12 o'clock at night, which really isn't like that late to be kind of a young person and to be out and about. And
right.
there was just this energy, Gary, where I was like, I want to go back to the suburbs. Like, I don't know what it was, but I didn't feel safe. And I've been out and about in Chicago in my 20s, and I would want to be out until 3 or 4. And it was like there was something where I felt really safe once I got to the suburbs. There wasn't really any crime happening in front of me per se, but there's just this energy. I don't know if COVID changed it or if it's the politics or the crime, but man, every time I visit Chicago, it's not what I used to know.
All of that is part of the equation, why it is what it is today. And that's what I'm hearing from everybody I talk to that lives in the city. I just don't feel safe. I was visiting some people that lived on the near west side, and I wanted to walk somewhere. It was only about 9, 10 o'clock at night, and they said, well, just kind of keep an eye out. I said, for what? Well, things happen in this neighborhood now, and this had never happened before. And I've known these people for 30 years. And I'm thinking, what? This is not right. I don't know how you can live in that atmosphere and pay the taxes you pay and go about your day and think, well, this is all fine. It's not. And you have to start moving in a direction that says we're going to get this under control. Instead, it seems like it's just keeping in the other direction of staying out of control. Or staying out of control, period.
There's this energy, too. I'm noticing everyone's moving out of Illinois. And I don't even know if that's a good or bad thing, but like all my mom's friends that are all retired now are moving to Tennessee, North Carolina. I left 10 years ago to go to Florida. And it's funny, like, it feels like everyone loves Chicago. They love the food here in Tampa Bay. There's places that are dedicated to Chicago. Everyone loves the idea of Chicago, but I don't know if anyone truly loves Chicago in 2024.
I totally agree. And what is happening is the states that have no state income tax, like Florida and Tennessee, and those states in the South are absorbing a lot of people who don't like the tax structure of Illinois, are tired of the weather and all those other elements, and then you throw some crime on top of it that's not going in the right direction, and that's it. Then the exodus is really on, and that's what they're seeing. And I don't know how the politicians can't see it and why they aren't really getting into solving some of these problems.
It almost feels like, I don't know, like, the mayor, I don't know his name, if it's like Brandon, the current mayor.
Johnson.
Yeah, Brandon Johnson. The current mayor says like, oh, these criminals are just teenagers that mean well or whatever. I'm like, It doesn't matter if you're 16 years old or 40. If you take a life or break into a house or beat up a grandma, you're committing a crime. It feels like there's this lack of accountability for crime that I just don't remember growing up. I never grew up in the city, but I watch the news every night, and I don't remember this attitude of like almost defending the criminals.
When I was growing up, there were some really, really scary gangs in Chicago. And you knew the neighborhoods that they operated in, and you stayed out of those neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That was, and I'm not saying that was good, but it seemed to be where you knew where you were safe and where you weren't.
Yes.
Now there's nowhere that you can go, this is absolutely safe. That's gone. And you're right about the mayor giving these people a pass that do this nonsense. He's calling these events where you get 300 kids together and they start breaking windows and punching people. He calls them, or the media is calling it a team takeover, like it's sponsored by some radio station. And one of the times that happened, one of the newspapers said these people seem like young Al Capones, and I said, well, that speaks badly of Al Capone. Al Capone wouldn't have been this sloppy. You know, that says something poorly. Don't even compare them to Al Capone. Al Capone was organized.
Yeah, it's funny how, like, I remember 15 years ago, I hated Rahm Emanuel. I just thought he was awful. I didn't like his attitude. Yeah. And then I didn't like Lori Lightfoot. And then I'm like, how is it possible that the current mayor makes Rahm Emanuel look amazing? Because I never would have thought. Because I remember, I believe it was summer of 2011, there was all that crime every single night. It was like record-breaking news on like WGN. I'd be watching WGN TV and they were like, oh, 100 people were shot this weekend or something like that. And there was a website that you could see how much crime was going on. And now I feel like Chicago's numb to it. I feel like 15 years ago, there was a shock of how much crime was going on. And I'm not in Illinois anymore, so I can't speak for it, but it just feels like people are so numb to it.
Yeah, I guess you get used to it, which is frightening. And as you get used to it, it's going to keep going. And I don't know what the plan is, but there's enough blame to go around. You can go from Brandon Johnson to Lori Lightfoot and Rahm, and then you can go to Mayor Daley and accuse him of doing some bad stuff too, which is selling the parking meters. That was a bad deal. Selling the Skyway, privatizing that. And those deals are on Daley. So that some of this blame goes way back.
In St. Petersburg, Florida, to park for 8 hours is, I believe, $20 maximum. Some places you can maybe even get it for $15. I parked for 2 hours in downtown Chicago back in August, and I paid like $70. I couldn't believe it.
I don't understand how the people that are in charge don't get how that is not going to work in the city's favor. That just prevents people from coming down. They'll just use any excuse, and these are valid excuses, for not going into the city.
One thing I want to ask you, because the thing I'm jealous about your generation when it comes to living in Chicago is I wasn't alive for the 85 Bears. And growing up in the 90s and 2000s, everybody talked about the 85 Bears. And the first year I watched the Bears, believe it or not, was when they went to the Super Bowl 17, 18 years ago. And I'm thinking, this is what it's going to be like every year. And they have sucked since then. How special was it in 85 when the Bears won? And how hard has it been the last 39, 40 years just seeing this decline every year?
That is a team that I was lucky enough to hang out with because we had several of the players on our show all the time. And so I was hanging out with them a lot socially. And you're right, it was the percussion and fizz of that team was more than just winning on the football field. It was the personalities on the team, and everybody was into it. Mike Ditka, the coach, had a TV show on Sundays that we make wholly fun of because it was so weird. And none of that exists anymore. And here's something I say to people, too. And I know some people might think this is a small point to make, but there is no, that I can think of, national presence, no celebrity out of Chicago that gives the city a national scope like Oprah, Michael Jordan, Siskel and Ebert, that kind of thing. And the sports teams have gone into their nuclear winters again. And the Bears, what is it, almost 40 years since they won a Super Bowl. And now the Cubs, that's getting to be in the ether. White Sox, oh, God. And the Bulls, that's, 25 years since Michael Jordan left?
Yeah, 26, yeah.
Yeah. So all the teams are just grinding in. And I don't know when any of them are going to emerge as a champion. And that Bears team of 85, you're right, because it was so special in so many ways. And now it's just, what is this team? It's just looking for a new stadium, as opposed to, why don't you put a team on the field that wins, getting a new quarterback every 2 or 3 years, a new coach every 2 or 3 years. It's just this wheel of futility that they're on.
So here's something I want to ask you too. So LeBron James was he currently is really big into social media. He'll post things. He'll sit in a king's throne. And a lot of the Gen Z kids, because I'm a millennial, I was born in 93, so I remember enough of Jordan, and I'm a Jordan and Kobe fan. I'm not the biggest LeBron fan. I respect him, but I'm not the biggest fan. But a lot of these Facebook posts I see from these Gen Z kids, they don't realize how great Jordan was, and they see how great LeBron is at playing. But you've obviously seen both players play. What made Jordan so much better than LeBron? Because it's an utter fact that Jordan's better than LeBron.
Well, I referred to that era of the Bulls as the Black Beatles, because wherever they went in the country, they were superstars. It wasn't just Chicago. It was around the country, and Jordan was just the new era of basketball playing, and that's why he became the superstar. And these guys that are coming up now, yeah, they're as good, but Jordan, I think, reset. And I know there were superstars before him, but this was different. This was different in a lot of ways, I think, because it was more of an event where you had more media attention than you did before that, the era of the 60s and 70s, whatever those superstars were. But this was different. This had a different feel to it. And I don't really follow basketball that much anymore, but I can't explain it entirely. But it was one of those moments in time where, wow, what's this? And now we're 25 years past it with the Bulls, 26 years, and they're still looking for that next superstar. That's how rare it is.
Well, they sort of had it with Derrick Rose. He won MVP, but man, I'll never forget it. I was about to graduate high school, and I was with my friend who is a physical therapist, and he always knew about the human body. He was a really smart kid. And I was watching the first game of the playoff series against the 76ers in 2012, and he was like, Derrick Rose needs to get out. He's playing too much. And then when Derrick Rose went down and tore his ACL, I'm like, oh yeah, do you think he'll be back in a few games? And I'll never forget, my friend who's a really smart dude was like, he will never be the same. He just tore his ACL. And my friend knew just by the way he fell and the way he was walking that he tore his ACL. And to me, there was a little bit of Chicago sports fandom that died that day, because there was a lot of hope with Derrick Rose. There was so much excitement. He almost beat the Heat in 2011. He was winning 55 games a year for the Bulls. To me, there was something that happened to the city culturally when Derrick Rose went down, because to me, that was like the pride and joy.
Yeah, well, Derrick Rose wasn't Michael Jordan.
Yeah, I know.
Michael Jordan was built like a racehorse, and that was part of it too. And that was a moment in time, like Halley's Comet, or you say Haley's Comet, where it comes around once every whatever amount of time, like the eclipse that's coming. I don't know when you're going to air this, but on April 8th, we're going to see that, and then that won't be around for 20 more years. These are just cyclical things that you can't, in the sports world, really predict. Some people, they say, are going to be superstars, and then it just never happens. And then somebody comes out and becomes a superstar that wasn't quite pegged. You don't know.
Now, whenever I interview radio hosts on my podcast, I'll ask them, do you want to make it into the Radio Hall of Fame? But I'm actually speaking to a Radio Hall of Fame member. What was it like being inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame?
Well, again, that was an honor that I still to this day can't comprehend. That was never my goal, Ryan, to go on radio and then get into the Radio Hall of Fame. I didn't even know if they had a Hall of Fame when I started. That was never something I thought about. And I just did the work that I liked doing, and it happened that I ended up in the Hall of Fame. That is quite the honor, because that's not a real huge group. So I am totally total respect goes that way in my head when I think about it. I just can't believe it. And I just grew up on the south side of Chicago thinking, I'll get into radio maybe. I will. Okay. And I did. And then all this happened. It wasn't a planned thing necessarily. It just started to happen.
Would you say it's sort of an icing on the cake kind of feeling?
I would think so. Yeah. I think it validates that, well, no matter what anybody said that might not have liked you, it seemed to work for a number of people. And you go with the masses. You're always going to have detractors. And you just want the people that like it to be more than the people that don't, although I just kind of contradicted myself with the mention of Howard Stern and Rush Limbaugh. But those are rarities, too. Those are people that have gone into this orbit that is very rare.
I remember when you first launched your podcast 8 years ago, you had Howard on the show. What was that like to talk to him?
I had seen and talked to Howard a couple times before that, before I put him on my first podcast, and then we went out to dinner a few years ago. Howard and I, we are in a very similar mindset because we both came up through the radio ranks at the same time, and he's in the Radio Hall of Fame too, and obviously, unless somebody doesn't know who he is, because I am always, as you may know from listening to my show, patrolling the use of the word obviously. People throw obviously around all the time, and a lot of times it's not obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hear that all the time. Well, obviously, and I'm thinking, well, then no, that's not obvious. But anyway, Howard has become this huge star and was on radio and then went to satellite, and I think he deserves all of the success he has. And he's a great guy. He's been very nice to me and has gone on and done things that I don't even know if he could comprehend 25 years ago.
I know. It's really crazy to think that, like, he's done it all. He had the TV show. He was the host, or he was one of the panel members on America's Got Talent. He pretty much he was the reason satellite radio took off. Like, it was around before then, but I feel like he's the reason it's what it is right now. Oh, yeah. That's why they hired him and why they're paying him the money they're paying him, because he brought a lot of people to satellite radio. And that's why you get a lot of money. You get what you can get, and he deserves it. Gary, can you believe that we've been talking for 34 minutes? Really? Yeah, isn't that crazy? We haven't done one commercial break. I know. If we were on the radio, we would have taken like 5 commercial breaks. Right. We'd be still trying to finish this up in an hour. Yeah, we would be playing, what was that, Cars for Kids for 4 times in a commercial break? Pretty much, yeah. Gary, for people that haven't checked out your podcast, how can they find it? Just go to GarryMeier.com. That's GarryMeier, and you'll see the shows listed there. And I hope people enjoy it. As I think you mentioned, I don't do any politics, or maybe you didn't mention it, but just to give people an idea of what they're heading into, I have never done politics. It never excited me. I don't find it entertaining, and I certainly wouldn't find it entertaining these days. And I just look at everything else on the globe and make fun of that. Gary, so in 2001, I didn't have TV. I had TV in the 90s, but my mom was watching too much cable that she was taking from the next door neighbor. So we cut the cord and we just watched VHSs and DVDs. And your show was the way I got my info about 9/11 And your show was the reason why I got into radio. It went from your show to Eddie and Jobo, Mancow, Brandmeier. All you guys are the reason I'm doing what I'm doing. So I cannot thank you enough for coming on my show and keep up the good work, as your current podcast sounds a lot better than a lot of shows in radio currently.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad to see that you found something that you really enjoy doing.
Gary, keep up the good work. It's been a lot of fun having you on the show.
Thanks, Ryan.
All right, thank you, Gary.
All right.
All right, goodbye. And that was the one and only Garry Meier, as he called into Hoppe Hour. Now, if this is your first time hearing my voice, hi, my name is Ryan Hoppe, and I've worked in radio for 12 years. I was influenced by Garry Meier, Mancow, Eddie and Jobo, Drax, Brandmeier. So pretty much go to every single major platform that has a podcast. I have two versions. I have the version where I do interviews with radio hosts and comedians, and I have my talk show that's a little similar to Mancow's Morning Madhouse and Eddie and Jobo growing up in Chicago. So go to every single major platform that has a podcast and search up Hoppe Radio, HLPPE Radio, to listen to
Hoppe Hour. Hoppe Hour.
And like that, he's gone.
Happy in the